Well, okay. Let's start. I thought we were going to get introductions, but I guess instead let us have people introduce themselves. Let's see. Let's enter what's a good way. I can't say. Let's start to my left. Uh, I'll ask people to introduce in the order that they are in my participants list, which apparently is different for everybody. But it starts with Bo Balder. So take it away, Bo.
Okay, hi there. I am Bo Balder, a writer from the Netherlands. So I'm writing in something that's not my native language. I've been writing for, I don't know, 15 years now. I've published one novel, which could or could not be a space opera. Anyway, it's set on a planet. And I've been published in fantasy and science fiction, Clark's World, Analog, Nature, mostly short stories. So excited to be in this great group of people. Thank you.
Next on my list is Bud Sparhawk. Bud?
I'm Bud Sparhawk. I'm primarily a short fiction writer. I usually hang out in Analog, on the pages of Analog, and but I have written for other magazines. I appeared in a number of anthologies. I've got 5 or 6 novels out there on Amazon, but my sales numbers are almost getting into the double digits. And, you know, so I'm on this panel to find out what's going on and what other people's ideas about plotting might be.
Okay, next on my list is Joe Haldeman. Joe?
Hi, I'm Joe Haldeman. I've written a couple hundred stories and a few dozen novels and other things. And I'm kind of a space flight freak and kind of a science fiction freak and kind of an academic freak, but a freak nonetheless. I think that means that there's something wrong with my genes.
Okay, and Scot Noel?
Morning, I'm Scot Noel. I'm the editor and publisher of Dreamforge magazine. We're relatively new. We've only been around for a couple of years, but my wife and I have been lifelong science fiction and fantasy fans, and you know, we just reached a point in our lives where we wanted to do something a little artistic, so we joined forces and put a magazine together, which does publish a little bit of space opera, so there you go.
Okay, oh, and I suppose I should introduce myself. I'm Geoffrey Landis, and part of my life I work at NASA, and actually I've been working with a space mission design team lately. And actually I'll be talking about one of the space missions we've been designing on a mission to Triton this afternoon, so stay tuned. In part of my life, I'm a science fiction writer, mostly a short story writer. I've written a moderate number of short stories. I did write one novel, which was probably not space opera, but so I go both directions. I do both the science and also the science fiction. So with that, let's go on to the topic. I see the topic for this particular panel is I Sing the Plotting Electric. So, you know, from that title, I think they labeled it that because they were afraid there would be too many people participating in the panel. So they wanted to give it a title that would make it clear nobody knew what we were going to talk about. But we think about, you know, the science fiction of Walt Whitman from the title. So, wait, no, sorry, I just got a note here that apparently Walt Whitman is incorrect. We're talking about space opera. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Good.
Space opera was originally a derogatory term that people used to refer to the likes of E.E. Doc Smith and Edmund Hamilton. I have to say, when I was a kid, I was absolutely in love with the book Crashing Suns by Edmund Hamilton. And I think that was the book that gave Edmund Hamilton his nickname of World Wrecker Hamilton. But it was a derogatory term. So man, when did that change? So let's start out, talk a little bit about the old science fiction, the old space opera. What do you think of the old space opera? Is this laughable? Was it something that you love? Both?
Both.
So, jump in, both. There you go.
Well, I think we have to honor the etymology of the term,
Mhm.
going back to horse opera, because really when people started talking about space opera, they were referring to pulp magazine, which were about cowboys and Indians for horse opera. And so space opera was just cowboys and Indians with aliens and spaceships. And it was a pretty accurate commercial term. We've become so much more sophisticated now.
Halfway.
Now we have postmodernist cowboys and Indians in spaceships.
Anybody else? What do you think about the old stuff?
Well,
I'm
how
sitting
old
here
do
with
you
my-
want me to talk about? I mean, Larry Niven, Jack Vance, or is that not old enough?
Well, I suppose you could think of both Larry Niven and Jack Vance as space opera. So go ahead. What do you think?
I love that stuff. I grew up with it, and I just adore, you know, the strange humans Jack Vance wrote about and the strange aliens Larry Niven wrote about, and the science was a bit of a hand-wavy thing there, which I don't mind at all. And it was just great for a kid, a teenager, to read about that. Yeah, it really sparked my imagination. So yeah, I'm totally in love with them still.
Scott, you started to
Oh, I
talk.
just wanted to show I've got my copy of 1951 Astounding Science Fiction here.
That's
And
the first.
there is I think a cultural age element to it, because there's stories in here see that are literally about essentially Earth as a fascist regime conquering other worlds and submitting them to Earth rule. And I think that comes out of, you know, when this was written. You're in 1951, just after World War II, and that was a story called Hell's Pavement by Irving E. Cox Jr. But it has a subversive sort of socialist twist at the end, where we're going to, you know, teach the fascists about how you really need to live in peace and empathy. But I think more than the writing being silly or that sort of thing, it's really, you see the culture change, and we're just living in a different cultural age, and we look back with perspective and say, well, that's kind of silly stuff, just because we're not in that age and we're not in that cultural milieu.
Well,
And Bud?
yeah, the science fiction of the early 50s, and well, from about 1938 to 1950s, to the 1960s, was primarily superficial. That is to say, it only looked at the surface of things. It looked at the science and explanations and descriptions and so forth. It did not go very much into the inner life of the characters. You might get a thought once in a while, but not generally. I think there were, with the exception of Sturgeon, I think there was very few writers who really did what we would call literary fiction today.
Yeah.
Incidentally, Scott, that magazine you held up was the first science fiction magazine I ever bought.
Oh, wow. Do you still have your copy? Did I get your
Yes,
copy?
I do. Matter of fact, I do. It's right on my bookshelf over here.
So here's a question actually came in from the audience, but also was going to be my next question. So this is from Bob Devney. When did space opera become respectable? What happened? Why did it move from being cowboys and Indians to space to something that people look at and say, whoa, I admit it, I read Ian Banks.
Le Guin.
Le Guin. You think of Le Guin as a space opera.
Well, she
Carry on.
has written, you know, about space and meeting empires in space even. So yeah,
I
she
would
could fit in there.
You know, I would keep the chromosomes straight, but I would go back to Judy Merrill and say that it really started in the mid-50s, although it wasn't dominant. It became dominant when the surrounding culture was sympathetic to feminist concerns. I don't know. It's always been there, but whether it is subordinate thread or part of the mainstream of science fiction is something that changes with the season.
Well, I think there's also just a wide range of what people call space opera. you know, one of my favorites is the Expanse series, Leviathan Wakes and all that with S.A. Corey, which I've heard called space opera. But then I've also heard in the movies, Thor Ragnarok called space opera. And you know, if you think of space opera as kind of that silly, very flamboyant, energetic thing, then Thor Ragnarok is space opera. But if you think of having a little bit of internal, you know, literary quality and that sort of thing, then maybe Expanse, and on TV, maybe the new Battlestar Galactica from the last few years. You know, we had some nice relationship stuff going on. Maybe that's space opera. So I think space opera also just means some different things to some different people.
Mm-hmm.
It could mean that space opera is, in a derogatory sense, is those things that have a simple through line on the plot. There's no subplots, there's no diversions or whatnot. You throw from part A, and then you throw in a lot of action. And maybe a little love interest. That didn't come in until about 1961, though.
Yeah, I think we also need to throw in a nod to the resurgence of the widescreen British space opera that came in, what, the 90s maybe?
Yeah.
Ian Banks,
Culture.
of course, is the superstar of that, but Peter Hamilton and some of the other Brits. A little bit later, Alistair Reynolds came up, but they sort of rewrote the rules on space opera, thinking, oh, you know, it isn't necessarily just cartoons. Huh.
Yeah.
Actually, we were talking about old space opera, and I guess we forgot to mention Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, the original space opera.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about why do you like space opera? What is it that's good about it? We were sort of talking about how, well, it's sometimes very superficial. I'd almost call that cartoonish. But what's good about it? Why space opera?
Well, I loved it when I was 12 years old, because when you're 12 years old, you love huge things that explain everything.
Mm-hmm.
I would go along with that, but for me, it's that, but it's also the idea that space opera often has that large arc of perspective. It's like we're looking at hundreds or thousands of years. We're looking at humanity over a long time period. We're not looking at apocalypse, you know, the climate, we're going to destroy ourselves with climate change and just fascism and war and whatever, and humanity's over and the zombies are coming. But that there is this idea of humanity surviving for a long period of time in whatever form and overcoming things. So I think that's its appeal to me.
Well, you're sounding like you're thinking of Olaf Stapleton as the primogenitor of space opera.
Yeah,
What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that. I kind of, and I don't even know if it is space opera, but recently, for instance, I just reread Asimov's The Foundation trilogy. Mm-hmm. And that has some of those elements that you know, I think like Bud was talking about, where it's very, very kind of simple. There's not a lot of internal thought. You're really talking about the society and how it's evolving. And there are very few women in there, and when they are in there, they're kind of just marginal characters a little bit. But so, well, you know,
until you get to Second Foundation.
Yeah, we do have the young girl who becomes a pivotal character whose name I can't remember at the moment, but it's just not deep in terms of the characters.
Mm-hmm. So actually,
Susan, what's her name? The major character foundation.
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
iRobot.
Yeah, actually, though, Mary has been commenting on my right microphone mostly to be heard. But in fact, when we were commenting about when space opera became respectable again, she mentioned a word that also hasn't been said yet, which is Star Wars. So that changed the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that had a useful effect, yeah.
Okay, anybody else? Why do we love space opera? Who likes space opera and why? I guess about half of you have mentioned. Anybody else?
I think I like space opera simply because it has a good series of actions in it. It's not very deep philosophically, but it does have and it does sort of play with the science behind things. I guess you could term my Sam Boone series as space opera because it has no science in it whatsoever.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
interesting.
there are
'Cause-
writers like Edmund Hamilton and his early 20th century ilk would be hurt that you think that their stories are not ambitious or not mature.
Yeah, space opera, as Hamilton and Smith wrote it, sort of moved onward from the old planetary romances
Yeah.
that obviously were initialized very much by Edgar Rice Burroughs, but carried on by people like Leigh Brackett.
Yeah.
Who, of course, Leigh Brackett and Hamilton. But Hamilton then went on much further into, the wilder reaches of the galaxy.
Mhm.
But let's talk about, they said we should talk about the resurgence in space opera. So let's go a little bit more about the resurgence. Who do you like recently? And I'll tell recently, I don't know, 90s and later. Who's up and coming in space opera, and who led the resurgence?
Ian Banks
Ian Banks, of course.
and Lecky.
Anne Leckie is a good one, yeah.
Oh, I love her.
A
Yeah.
good name to throw out
John Scalzi.
to some extent. Come on, who do you like?
Kate Elliott.
Okay.
I should say that John Henry has done a very long-running series of space operas.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sort of focusing on the naval warfare aspect of it.
Mhm.
It's,
Would,
We've got
would we
Elizabeth
consider
Bear.
Would we consider David Weber's like Honor Harrington series space opera? Or is that just
sure.
military SF?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, space opera and military SF sort of fit together like jigsaw puzzle pieces. They overlap. So, more. Anybody else? So why do you like these people? You got names, but why?
Because it's more than just action and projecting medieval empires onto space, which is basically what I think Star Wars is, and which is kind of bores me. But someone like Anne Leckie looks ahead at what kind of societies might we have if things were different on a really big scale, and then has a story in there that has internal. It has character development against this great backdrop of huge human inhabitation and even aliens.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the attractions of space opera is going back, I think, to what Joe said, the origins in horse opera. Well, what's kind of an underlying thread is the idea of a vast expanse of some place where you can be free and reinvent yourself, and where there are lots of opportunities to be a different kind of person, and not kind of just in your little cubicle, where your career is, I go to the cubicle and I type on the computer and that sort of thing. So there's just that escapism that there's a frontier somewhere, and there's no longer that frontier feeling for the West, but there's a frontier feeling for the development of humans in space. So I think there's that attraction to it.
You can skip all the problems. You can skip ahead and pretend, they've been solved.
Say what you're gonna.
Well, basically, most space opera is good versus evil. I mean, that's the basic plot, and there's not a lot of subtlety in the evil part. You don't.
Maybe that's for old space opera, but I don't think that's true for the newer stuff. That's more gray.
They're just doing that to get by.
You think?
One thing I kind of just wanted to throw in there was, what do people feel about, like, just in the real world, we now have like SpaceX and Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, and people are actually seeing ships being built and launched commercially, and it's not a government thing. And I just wonder how that ties into and what that has to do with people liking space opera. Do they actually look around and say, oh, this age is coming, and you know, have, you know,
Sort of like people who were saying, well, I guess science fiction is dead when we landed the first man on the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems to be a different thread of science fiction. That's sort of more the thread of science fiction that is moving with all of the first man on the moon stories and the exploration of Mars and the sort of near term. That in some ways is actually the opposite of space opera. Space opera almost never even mentions, oh, how do you do space flight? Nobody thinks about fuel. Nobody thinks about mass ratios. Nobody thinks about the delta V. People just jaunt off to the Magellanic Clouds to go play games with people there, and nobody thinks. So actually, I'd almost call that the opposite pole from space opera. There were a couple of people making some comments a little bit further back. Samuel Lubel, hope I'm pronouncing that right, mentioned, actually there's very few space battles in the Asimov Foundation series, at least the original Foundation series, which actually brings up a sort of interesting question. Is space opera really about big space navies fighting each other, or is warfare and action scenes integral to space opera? Is that important? Is that what it's about?
I should hope not. That's so boring.
Well,
Yeah.
It's a corner of the space opera, but it's not dominant. I think part of it is especially viewed in a historical context, space opera was a very masculine subgenre. And so part of masculine writing was the soldier and the returned soldier and all that, which science fiction sort of outgrew around the 1950s or 60s, I think. Although I've been a hanger-on in that subgenre for some time.
I'm
Yeah,
always
there's more to it than just battles, what you're writing about. So you're giving it more personal depth. So that would, contradict your own statement.
I always take issue with the word science fiction because very few of the science fiction stories, especially in the magazines, deal with science per se. They're mostly engineering stories or application stories.
a lot of them aren't even engineering stories. They're gosh wow stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with gosh wow. Another comment coming in from the audience from Roberta Grogow, just mentioning the influence of women writers, Lois McMaster Bujold, C.J. Cherry, Connie Willis, although I can't think of Connie Willis having ever written anything I call but C.J. Cherry really sort of hit with a big bang when she first came in with some of her things like Brothers of Earth, some of her very early stuff, and then continued on with the Down Below Station coming on.
Yeah.
For a while, Lois McMaster Bujold was the face of space opera when she came in with the Miles Vorkosigan stories. So what about the influence of women writers on space opera? What do you think? Oh, another person mentioned Sharon Lee and Steve Miller, a team that's sort of half female. So, another name to throw out. Comments?
I think, when you're young and you're a girl, you're just kind of fine with imagining being a boy having space adventures. But when you grow older, it kind of starts to rankle and chafe, and you want female heroines in a female perspective. to, yeah, because it matches up more with, you know, what you like to, what you read, what you feel, what you want to enjoy. But yeah, that's, you know, you're all boys, so you probably think different. Oh, did I misstep here? I'm sorry if I did.
No, that's
You
why
seemed, okay.
I think your
You seem
opinion is the
masculine,
most
so.
valid here. That's why I'm yeah.
I think one of the things that has happened is the audience has changed. In the last century, mostly science fiction was for boys. It was mostly male. You had things appearing in things like Argosy and Collier's and other magazines that were primarily focused on men. It was only in the 90s when we started to get the cultural revolution in society that we started seeing the appearance, I shouldn't say the appearance of, because women were always there. They were always writing, but they became, all of a sudden people started noticing them, I guess you would say. So it was social awareness that overtook us.
So is that part of the resurgence of space opera? Shall we blame C.J. Cherryh?
Yes.
Yeah, why not?
Sure.
She has a lot to answer for.
Actually, somebody mentioned the most recent Hugo novel winner, Arkady Martine, with an empire called Memory.
Ah.
So there's another. Actually, that's a thing you see in space opera a lot, is galactic empires.
Yeah.
Of course, with Foundation was about the fall of a galactic empire. Star Wars about the existence of a galactic empire. So, any comments on the Hugo winner, Empire called Memory called Empire?
It's more of an intimate novel about, you know, people clashing and not so much about the empire stuff. I feel that's more in the background.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I enjoy that. Yeah.
So, would you call it space opera, or would you call it?
Nah, well, you know, if it wants to join, fine, but not necessarily. No, it's there's no fighting in space, or there's no. Is there? Nah, it's I don't know.
Okay.
Is it important? But yeah.
Well, yeah, a lot of what we're talking about is how do you fit things in categories? And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
the things that break categories are often more important than the things that fit categories.
Mhm.
I suppose we should, the guest of honor here at Confluence is Martha Wells.
Wow.
Probably at least mention our guest of honor.
I love the murder bots.
So,
My child loves the murder bots. I mean, it's just great. It's fantastic.
It's great.
It's like fanfic for science fiction readers somehow. It's didn't read it, didn't enjoy it, or
yeah, I've been reading it.
I only see a couple of the boys shaking their heads. So
Okay. Well, the nice thing about the murder bots is they started out like really thin little books, so they sort of sneak you in with something.
Yeah.
And I say, "Oh my God, I'm addicted."
Yes. Yes.
I think Vera Brooke just asked an interesting question here that I can answer for myself, but can't answer for the rest of you guys. She wanted to know, how do we balance writing and reading? How do we keep up with the field and still manage to get anything out, especially since the publication of science fiction works has exploded in the last 10 years?
Mm-hmm. Well, can you answer that for yourself?
I can answer for myself.
Okay.
I don't keep up.
Well, the other thing is most writers can't afford to keep up and keep buying all those novels that are out there.
And as a editor publisher, I agree. I can't keep up. It's for one. Once we started the magazine, we're looking at like in a reading period of 1,000 stories, so we're reading those. Plus, reading what we want to read for enjoyment. Plus, I'm a very eclectic reader, so I'm reading well outside of science fiction and fantasy. I'm one of the things on my night shelf right now is actually The Courtship of Miles Standish by,
Okay.
Wadsworth Longfellow. So yeah, you can't keep up. You just try to target and do what you can.
One of the things is when you start writing, you can't read for enjoyment anymore. You start reading with a critical eye all the time. You say, "Oh, I wouldn't have said it that way. Oh no, that's he missed the plot point there."
I like those. The ones
I can still find some books to read for enjoyment, but I am so much more critical. That is absolutely a drawback.
Yeah, the
So if
measure.
I'm delighted to find a book that I can disappear in, I'm
Yeah.
happy.
The measure of a good book is when you get a quarter of the way through, you stop being critical and just start
Yeah.
getting into the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, you can also choose books that you know you won't read critically. I just started reading a Nero Wolfe mystery, and believe me, I'm not going to be critical about it.
I don't know if I could reread that. But yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can't keep up, but you can pick what you enjoy, and that, just anything that helps you relax and get into this head sphere that will also help you write. I mean, you're feeding your inner creativity by reading other people's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to read also, because otherwise when do you stop reading? When you start writing? Well, if you stopped reading that long ago, you're going to lose touch with the field. You're going to be lost. You're going to, and I feel that writing is like a conversation. And I see that in recent books that some people seem to be talking to each other, like Yoon Ha-lee and Anne Leckie and Murderbot. They seem to have like a conversation. If you read the books in order, it's like, oh, well, they've been reading this, and now this is their version of what they think it should have been. I think that's just great. So those are all writers I can still disappear in. So thank you, guys.
The other way is to expand your reading by getting into writing groups that do not concentrate on hard science fiction or soft science fiction, that might have fantasy and horror and some other things in there, so you can appreciate the writing as opposed to the subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
I find that hard, to enjoy straight literature anymore. But it's good that you can. Yeah.
Or you can be like me and sort of surrender to the lure of academia and wind up reading stuff that I don't know, that has academic appeal and sort of satisfies a little weird bump that teachers get. I mean, I love to read a novel that makes me think of it as a teaching device. It's what could my students learn from this? And I would love to explain this to somebody. But that's that's just a special kind of deviation that some people have.
Okay, so I'm curious, what is it that you most want to explain to students?
How to go make a living doing something else. Don't compete with me.
It's hard to compete with you, I have to say. That's a tough target. So,
Well, I'm just going to throw this in there. Nothing about what we're talking about, but my wife handed me a note. It's like, how can you talk about space opera and not talk about Firefly, which is basically space opera and horse opera together.
Yeah, I have to say a couple of people mentioned Firefly in the chat and the Q&A windows. So mention Firefly. What do you think?
I loved it. A shame it only had 14 episodes to show itself. I like the series more than the movie Serenity.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun, and not deep, just fun. And I thought the characters were well done.
I think actually people like it because there were only 14 episodes.
Didn't have a chance to mess itself up.
It didn't have it exactly. Although I guess there's two different types of science fiction series. the ones that start out like great and then sort of mess up in the second season, then the ones that start out sort of, I don't know, and then when they get to the second season, they really click together. So it can go either way.
The advice to a writer is to start out really, really low and don't impress anybody. So everybody will be surprised when you finally write something coherent.
Oh my God, he actually wrote something good. Well, I think this is the part about you don't want people to compete against you, because that's not what you did. So, okay, what else? Actually, let's talk a little bit about the interplay between the visual science fiction and the written science fiction. We've been mostly focusing on written science fiction, but there's a whole giant world of movie and television science fiction. Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars, Firefly. You could even, I think of Star Trek as space opera.
Yeah.
So
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Guardians of the Galaxy, yeah.
Well, Gay
I
mentioned.
usually think it's disappointing. Because it seems that directors like to make movies from the books they read when they were kids in the 50s and the 60s. And they've ignored, where's everybody?
Help.
Oh,
I'm gone.
10-minute warning.
No, that's
yeah.
our
I'm
one.
back.
That was
And the
God.
recent stuff
Sorry,
isn't
I
getting
was trying to
filmed.
show the 10-minute warning screen. I apologize.
Okay. Should I repeat
Yeah,
myself?
no, keep going, keep going.
Well, you know, the good versus evil battles, that feels really old-fashioned. Even Firefly is a little simplistic, although I did enjoy it. And then all the nuanced, great new stuff isn't being filmed. Not the science fiction stuff, it seems to me. This is all boy directors filming their teenage crushes. And they're like, yeah, okay, we can do better. There's more fun out there.
I agree with that, and I also think maybe it's just a matter of we have to wait for those people to get their chance
to grow up.
But we see that with the submissions that we get. We get a lot of stories where it's very obvious that, you know, this was their favorite movie, and they that creative impulse is to try to recreate or do homage to it or channel that in some way. So we see a lot of submissions that are either you know, based on their favorite book or based on their favorite movie, and they want to do something to try to recreate that through their own creative impulse. And so I think that's just being human.
That's great. I mean, that's how we start, I guess, as kids. And then
I think you're also being too complimentary, because there's also a conservative kind of lack of ambition. You know, that worked. I'm going to try my version of it, because that's going to work too, because I'm so much more worthy of all that.
well, it's about making money, and then you
That's
better
also
do
human.
fewer things, huh? Yeah, which is sad, but
There was a question coming in from Vera Brook asking, what about science and technology readings? Pointing out the challenge of SF is staying at the edge of current science and tech to extrapolate into the future. That seems hard, actually, because the world around us already feels like SF.
Yeah.
I'll actually say that probably space opera is in many ways kind of the worst extrapolation of current science and technology, because most space opera moves so far into the gosh wow future that it ignores science and technology completely.
I would love to live in the culture. I mean, that seems like a great place to be, but
the culture is just, their science and technology is utterly whatever you can make up to make people say, gosh, wow.
yeah, true.
I'll throw out a couple of names, actually, that do at least sort of pay a bit of attention to real science. And the first was Alastair Reynolds.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, oddly enough, I first ran into Alastair Reynolds when he was an astronomer for the European Space Agency, before he quit his job to write science fiction. But he does a sort of amazing thing of writing space opera while keeping Einstein's relativity
Yeah.
as a law of the universe. He'll break pretty much every other law of physics: conservation of energy, conservation of momentum, causality, but he keeps Einsteinian relativity. So, and another one name that I would throw out is Greg Egan.
Yeah.
Greg Egan, I don't know if he's mostly known for space opera or not, but some of his work I think could very much be called space opera. I think Diaspora, some of his early work. And he really is very, very fascinated by what is on the cutting edge of science. In fact, he often goes way beyond the cutting edge of science. In fact, some of his novels, I often read them and say, man, I have a PhD in physics and I am struggling to keep up. And I'm thinking, who is he aiming this at?
There's other sciences than astronomy and physics. I mean, how about biology,
Yes.
bioengineering, nanobiology?
Yeah.
That's
5 minutes, panelists.
okay.
The problem, well, of course, space opera is sort of aimed at space flight, so that does give it a bit of science and engineering to it.
Well, think of Peter Hamilton with his giant living spaceships like space whales.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems.
Does that make any sense whatsoever?
I don't know. For story-wise, it does. I have no idea if it makes any sense biologically. Who knows?
I just wanted to say, I think space opera affects science the other way, or at least engineering the other way, and that, you know, now we've got Elon Musk essentially building the spaceships we saw in the 1950s that are going to land on their fins. It's a little bit of the influence of, here's this gosh wow thing, and then the engineers are inspired to say, well, I want to build that. There's some way I can build that.
That's our job, exactly.
It's the engineer's job to make up stronger fins.
Yeah, well, Elon Musk, of course, eliminated the fins and just said, oh, we'll just put landing legs on this thing. No fin. So the next one will have fins.
Yep.
So, well, we are running very short on time. We have 4 minutes. So would people like to make some closing statements about space opera? Panelists, do you want to jump in, or shall I call you in order? Okay, closing statement. Okay, in my order, we have Bo Balder first. So what's your closing statement? What do you have to say?
I love space opera. Other writers out there, go write more. Readers, read more, and just, you know, let your imagination go, because it has to be fun. Yeah, Farscape had living ships. I'm still to get there. Yeah. Sorry, I was just distracted by a question from the audience.
Well, question answer.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have any fancy statement to make. It was fun.
I think our discussion has really focused on the exact meaning of space opera and its place in the finality of all science fiction. We've definitively defined.
I think that the thing that we get from space opera is, the thing that we should retain from space opera is the notion of romance in science fiction.
Yeah.
And not get too caught up in its relationship to the real world, and think about what makes it attractive to the irrational and the childish in our readers and ourselves.
And
Ditto.
For myself, space opera helps give that idea of that arc of civilization that's far longer than what we're experiencing now, and just the idea that, yes, humans cause problems, but we're also the greatest problem solvers in existence. So look forward to a great future, regardless of what problems we have today.
yes, we're both the problems and also the problem solvers. So, Not the way it always is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think somebody mentioned it, but probably worth saying again. The great thing about space opera sometimes is the sense of fun. Space opera is the part of science fiction where we can sort of look out and say, wow, this is going to be fun.
The sense of wonder and the sense of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, the sense of wonder, the gosh wow is in some sense what science fiction is all about, or maybe what it should be all about. So, okay, any final words?
It's been a great panel. I'm absolutely astounded to be on this panel with you guys, and you're just my heroes. So,
Yeah, you were astounded, amazing stories.
Amazing panel.
Okay, well, there will be a discussion in the Discord server afterwards. I have to say I had better put together my 1 o'clock presentation, so I might drop into the Discord briefly, but then head out.
Link it here, we won't get
Thanks, panelists. It was really great.
thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.